Welcome to the Self Careapist Podcast. Join me, Lorain Moorehead, a licensed psychotherapist, clinical supervisor, and EMDR consultant, along with expert guests as we explore the approaches and modalities we've used and developed to support our clients' success. Our conversations and stories are designed to inspire new and seasoned clinicians to stay curious, prioritize self-care, and never stop learning. Dr. Brinen is a clinical psychologist in private practice and an assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. He is a developer of recovery-oriented cognitive therapy, CTR, and has been active in adapting CTR for different settings and training therapists from around the world. In this conversation, we cover Dr. Brinen's work with Dr. Aaron T. Beck, the father of CBT, symptoms and opportunities for individuals with psychosis, connecting with the individual, helping them to have a recovery-oriented focus, and adapting our treatments to include targeting meaningful aspirations in a really vivid way. We discuss activity scheduling, including families in the therapeutic process for psychosis, and, of course, Dr. Brinen's book, Living Well with Psychosis. And I even managed to weave in Taylor Swift. Welcome, Dr. Brinen.
Hello. Nice to meet you.
Hi. Glad to have you here today.
Yeah.
So this has been a pretty exciting week for you, I imagine.
Yeah. So Living Well with Psychosis is sort of out in the world now, so people can get it. So it's been really exciting. Are you grabbing your copy? And actually the really wild thing was while we were away, they sent me the hard copy, which is just really wild to have like a hard copy version of it. So when I got home, I actually got to open up the hard copy version. So to hold like a hardback version of a book you wrote, that's just like really wild. So yeah.
Yeah, really that's really special.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your journey, how you started to specialize in psychosis and what led you to write this book?
Yeah. So I finished my training as a psychologist, right? And so for people who don't know what that is, how that goes is that you kind of go, you do all the schoolwork just like any other degree. But after you kind of finish your it's about like 4 years of training, and then you do a year where you get it's a year where it's an internship where you basically work for a year as the psychologist, but you're still heavily supervised for that year. You then actually usually have to go and do these extra hours. Most licenses have that, right? And what are called they're called postdoctoral hours. And so I'd actually spent all of my training and written all of my papers, and my dissertation was actually on the treatment of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I had to do it with my postdoc, and I applied for a couple of postdocs. And I applied to work with Aaron T. Beck, who was one of the creators of who was the creator of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so a lot of people usually know his name with like sort of the Beck depression inventory, Beck anxiety inventory, like Aaron Beck, that Beck. And so I ended up working for him. And I came in to work on this a program training people in the community to use cognitive behavioral therapy. And I ended up sort of working sort of by a series of fortunate events on his schizophrenia study, and then going out and training people in the community to use that. And what happens, I just sort of stuck around, and it's actually funny. One of the other postdocs sat me down and explained. They had to sort of explain like how we understood schizophrenia. And she sits me down. Her name's Nadine Chang, and I call her like my psychosis mom. And she sits me down and she goes, there's these things called safety behaviors. And I go, oh, safety behaviors. I know those, like social anxiety disorder. And she goes, no, safety behaviors. They're in schizophrenia. And I go, safety behaviors. They're a behavior that you engage in the short run that makes you feel better, but in the long run, they actually maintain the problem. She goes, yeah, schizophrenia. I said, no, social anxiety disorder. And she goes, no, schizophrenia. I go, agree to disagree. Go on. And the minute she did that, it opened up my eyes. And again, schizophrenia and psychosis, something I'd never really spent a lot of time on. I'd sort of bumped into it. I had to support my family. my wife was 6 weeks pregnant when I started grad school. So with our first child, so they tend to want to eat and have clothes and all that stuff. Like, so I worked, midnight to 8 a.m. in a psychiatric hospital admitting people. So I kept working on this treatment that was finishing its clinical trial, and I was one of the last therapists onto the clinical trial, and then we had to formalize it and train people on how to do it. And I really have this mind for like how do things work, and I'm sort of a trainer by nature, right? So really trying to communicate to people how do we do things. And so that's how I kind of came to developing this treatment along with Dr. Beck and the rest of the team at the University of Pennsylvania. And then we started this process of kind of going all around the state of Georgia and all through Philadelphia and up to Massachusetts and just slowly expanding out and adapting it from just outpatient, right? 50-minute sessions to ACT teams, which are these sort of like almost like hospitals without walls, and then to inpatient, to state hospitals, and just, everywhere these individuals were, we were like, let's just figure out how do we do it, and adapting it. And so that's how I came to treating psychosis. Yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's just become, this thing that I do, which is really fantastic.
Yeah. Is the model that you're talking about recovery-oriented cognitive therapy?
Yep. Yeah. Recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. It actually originally it was just called cognitive therapy for schizophrenia. And what we realized was, we always knew it was this extension of CBT for psychosis, right? Which has this long, a lot of people go, CBT for psychosis. We've never heard of that. It's actually people have been doing it, I always say for 20 years, but I think I've been saying that for 10 years. So that means it's been done for 30 years, right? But it's been done for like decades, right? Like, the original work on this goes way back. The people in the UK and in Europe were doing that a long time ago. And they applied Beck's model of anxiety disorders to psychosis, right? And so, but it's extending it to these problems that people have with motivation and problems with connection, what we call the negative symptoms, right? Where there should be something, it's been removed, right? So there's that set of symptoms that people have. And where this sort of British CBT for psychosis was that very traditional CBT model of we're going to develop a list of problems and we're going to target each of those problems until they're gone, and like that. We recognized that the individuals we were serving, their underlying beliefs were this idea that I'm broken, and why try? Nothing works out anyway. And think about the last time, just anybody who's listening to this right now, think about those times in your life where you've really seen yourself as broken, and we've all had those, or when you think, well, I try, nothing's going to work out anyway. And probably anybody who's listening to this has probably had, when I started the business, it was a pile of notes. And probably now it's just like a queue of notes in like Epic or Simple Practice or whatever your electronic medical record is. Although I'm sure there's like one person who's like, I still have paper notes. Good for you.
Probably.
Right. And you think, why try? I'm never going to get through them anyway. And what happens? Your motivation goes, ugh, right? And then all of a sudden you've checked Instagram, you've gone on Facebook, and you've, gotten an extra cup of coffee, and that motivation goes down, right? These individuals, it's on just that much more severe of a level that those beliefs are going on. And so when I approach somebody about their problems, you really flex that idea of why try, right? And then they really see this mountain of it's never going to work out, right? Because all of that problem list just looks like it's just never going to work out. And so one of the parts that we started to recognize is we needed to start focusing in on the recovery side of it, right? What we ultimately realized, we're really focusing on the recovery side of it. What do you want to be doing? What do you want to get? And so anything that got in the way of that, we were going to target to get out of the way. Now, in all fairness, if you go back and read some of the original books like Kingdon and Turkington's CBT for schizophrenia, or Tony Murray. I'm just throwing out names, but these are some of the original books, like people who know CBT for psychosis go, oh, I have that book, right? Or if you go back to like Toni Morrison's, has a book on CBT for psychosis. If you go there and you flip through it and you actually read it from the beginning of the book, they actually talk about finding the things that people want. But what happens is you get that book and you go, this guy I'm working with has hallucinations. And you skip right past all the stuff about what somebody wants in their life. And you get to the hallucinations and you go, how do I get rid of these hallucinations, right? That's what people do. But what we really focused in on is, where do people want to be going in their lives? And we really made that the centerpiece of it. And action toward what they want, that was the core of it, right? And so at the core of the treatment. And so what we realized is, the treatment really is this idea of this recovery-oriented cognitive therapy. It's this fusion of the recovery movement, that spirit of connection, purpose, meaning, health, and the know-how of cognitive therapy, right? And whether you like cognitive therapy, whether you don't, most people agree that cognitive therapy is very like toolkit meet, something that you got to do, right? Cognitive therapy is known for moving freight. So if you fuse that spirit and the toolkit, you can actually get that stuff done.
Yeah. That, I think you say in your book, if we're going to talk about living well, we need to talk about living. And it sounds like that's the essence. There are these little quips throughout. I found it really entertaining. There was a Taylor Swift reference. I was a happy camper.
Can you tell me where's the Taylor Swift reference?
You mentioned her song Mean. I think it was in the context of people on the treatment team or being seen in that way.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that does track that I would. Because the other part of it is, one of the things I learned is, one of the things you learn when you write a book is, you can't quote songs because you have to pay for them. And it's a really funny thing. So I had like all these quotes, and it was funny because the first quote that got cut, that that my editor got my chapter, she's like, you can't quote a movie, right? I go, what do you mean? And it was such an innocuous one that was really written for only somebody my age would have liked. It was from the movie Dirty Dancing, of all things. And it was Nobody Puts Baby in a Corner. Mm-hmm. And she's like, you can't do that unless you want to spend a lot of money. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then she just explained to me all of this stuff. And so there were like all these quotes that had to get like the axe. So, yeah. That's
so interesting. I can see how you wouldn't think of that, because there are so often quotes in books that just, as it turns out, they're not movies or music.
Yeah. That's why there's a lot of, I already had a lot of Shakespeare, but some of the quotes that I could not get the rights to from friends who knew people, they got swapped out, and then Shakespeare found its way in a lot more than it had already been.
Oh, so interesting.
I'm a Shakespeare lover anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's interesting to hear that you're really highlighting what's it going to look like on the other side when we're pulling in hope and we're pulling in your vision. What would that look like? And it's not going to look like avoiding scenarios because you're not sure how you'll feel. It's actually going to, in some ways, look like the opposite, where you're staying really active and designing a life that you want to be engaged in. Yeah.
A lot of the work that I talk about, because it's very, I've always found it interesting because while on one hand, it's very much about recovery and it's very person-centered, I often find that when I'm supervising cases or consulting on cases, it looks like CBT, right? It's not like a bait and switch, but it's really, let's do the hard work for the thing that we really want. It really is. We do hard things because they're worthwhile to do. And so I think there's this idea out there, like, let's accept this runner-up life, right? Let's and I'm like, why? Why don't we just figure out what you want to do and then see, can we do that thing, right? So if you want to be a psychologist, let's figure out what would make that hard. What would make that, what would be difficult about that? What are you nervous about with that? And then let's solve that problem. Let's not avoid things because it's hard. Let's solve the problem and do the hard thing, right? We all do hard things in life, and nobody more than the individuals that we serve, right? And that's across all of the individuals I serve. Nobody does harder things than the individuals I serve with PTSD, individuals I serve with OCD or with depression, and definitely the ones that I serve with psychosis, right? And so let's just do hard things so that way we get good lives, instead of like a life that we feel like is sort of like a runner-up life. And I don't mean that in a hard way, but like so many times we're like, well, we're gonna create this sort of sheltered life that they didn't really ask for. And do we all do we all end up exactly where we want to end up in life? No, I mean that's I mean, not to be callous, but that's life, right? Not all of us are doing exactly what we wanted to do when we were 7 years old.
Yeah. I'm not the Easter Bunny.
Yeah, you're not the Easter Bunny. You know, I always tell people I was going to be a baker or a Broadway singer. And that's the truth. And I'm very happy with what I'm doing too. Also, when we don't end up where we thought that we were going to end up, sometimes we're actually happier where we ended up. Right. And the funny thing is, I'm constantly going through changes in my life. Right. I am not young anymore, and I've gone through another change, right? 5 years ago, I was going to stay at Drexel University and create a center and be in Philadelphia the rest of my life. And then I moved to Nashville, and I started collaborating with a colleague of mine. But when I moved to Nashville, I had no idea that I was going to write a book, much less be halfway through another book, much less, right? Like, so like all of this stuff, like, that's the beauty of life. And so working with our individuals to say, okay, what makes that hard? Let's just get that hard thing out of the way, right? Let's just solve that problem so we can get to this really awesome thing. You're right. Yeah.
How do you pull in the targeting of some of the specific symptoms that you're noticing? I guess to start, what are some of the specific symptoms that you treat when it comes to psychosis?
Sure. So if we're thinking about psychosis, I mean, they can be any number of things, but usually the ones when we're talking about are, and we think about sort of the way that we think about them traditionally, we're oftentimes thinking about things like, I'm always initially looking at what I think of as problems with motivation, problems with connection. The technical terms that people think about are things like avolition, the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And just to be really technical, when we're thinking about psychosis or schizophrenia spectrum diagnoses, when we're talking about negative symptoms, the negative symptoms are the idea that is a technical way of describing it is where there's something, it's been removed. And the positive symptoms is where there should be nothing, it's been added, right? So sort of like if anybody remembers back to behaviorism, like positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. So it's positive is addition to, negative is removal of, right?
Yeah.
So negative symptoms are removal of. So those are going to be things like motivation, connection, affect, like emotions and stuff like that. And so those are things like avolition is sort of your motivation, asociality is sort of the desire to connect with people and socialize, anhedonia, which is known for depression, which actually individuals with schizophrenia don't have anhedonia. They just don't anticipate having pleasure. Alogia, that's sort of the speech problems. Flat affect, right? So it's, Dr. Beck used to say it's all the A's, right? So it's like all of those A's. And so initially I'm always looking for, and this is just the way I've always sort of programmed my brain, is I'm always looking for the negative symptoms, because by the nature of the way our brains work, we don't look for what's not there. And that's technically what the negative symptoms are, is like what's not there. So we oftentimes will miss the negative symptoms, but we will see the positive symptoms, right? So we would see hallucinations and delusions, but we might not notice that the young person that we're serving or the medium or older person that we're serving hasn't been leaving the room, right? So those are the negative symptoms. And then the next group of symptoms would be sort of hallucinations, which are sort of those perceptual disturbances, right? So it might be hearing things, seeing things, feeling things that other people aren't hearing, seeing, or feeling. And then there are these sort of strongly held beliefs, what are traditionally thought of as delusions. And there are usually a series of things that are sort of adding to those. And so those could be things like worry. And so in delusions, there's usually like 70% of people experience what are called persecutory delusions, which are those fears that that's those sort of unfounded or unrealistic threat beliefs that you're sort of under attack by an entity for a specific reason. There are beliefs of exceptionality, which have traditionally been called grandiose delusions. That you have like a specific purpose and thing like that. And so those are typically thought of as there are these sort of contributory pieces to them because those are sort of a belief, and beliefs don't change by sort of direct questioning. And so typically for those, we're going to be targeting things like worry, self-confidence, sleep, anomalous experiences like the voices, and the defensive behaviors. And that's really great work that's been done by a group in the UK, led by Daniel Freeman at Oxford, particularly around persecutory delusions. So those are sort of a lot of them. But then there's sort of anger. There's PTSD, which is hugely comorbid with schizophrenia and schizophrenia spectrum diagnoses, and any of those other pieces. And so one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to figure out how do we sort of break through to the individual, right? And that's going to be sort of connecting with them on any number of topics that are really important to them, right? Because like I said before, if I start by going, let's start talking about what's wrong with you, it's oftentimes going to sort of flex that belief around being broken and bad and stuff like that. And those negative symptoms, right? Those problems with motivation, problems with connection, those are going to be more likely to activate. And so anybody here who's watching, who's worked with these individuals before, and you've asked a lot of those questions that we have to ask as sort of therapists and stuff like that, and you get like one-word answers, right? I bet there's a whole bunch of people watching right now being like, oh, I've been there, right? And then every once in a while you might go, oh, heck, did you see the Titans play? And then all of a sudden this person who's giving you like one-word answers just unloads like a 3-hour dissertation on what the Titans need to do to do it, right? Or like chew your ear off about how amazing Taylor Swift is, and it's so great that she got all of her masters back, right? And that she bought them back, right? Like whatever that is, right? And so all of a sudden, like she's just like you just get that back, and so there's this way in which we're sort of flexing this sort of adaptive mode, this way that person comes forward. And at that point, we can start talking with those people about what they want to be doing, what they want to get, right? Because when we're talking about sports or music or cooking or whatever those things are, we're flexing not this idea of why try things aren't going to work out anyway, or I'm broken, or I'm a schizophrenic and things aren't going to work out, right? I'm flexing this idea of, oh, I can connect with Lorain. I'm worthwhile, right? I'm, whatever that is, right? There's something that I'm connecting around, versus this idea of flexing these ideas of I'm broken, right? And so that's when we sort of come alive. And it's true of any of us, right? When people talk to us about the things that we're really excited about, that we feel really good about, those are the times that we're more likely to come alive and talk with people. Once that happens, then that person's a little bit more primed, and we can start asking them, this is really great. Like, once this is all over, what do you want to be doing? What do you want to get? That's when we get those personal, meaningful, valued aspirations, right? Drawing out those really important aspirations, right? And in Living Well with Psychosis, and I think I saw your brain's kind of ticking along, you can kind of see how it's drawn out in the book, right? Mm-hmm. This way of sort of drawing people into this idea. And it's not being manipulative. It's just really the individuals who I've served, who have read the book, they're like, Dr. Brinen, every once in a while it just feels like I'm reading the book. It just feels like I'm in therapy with you, right? Like it very much feels like talking to you. As we have those aspirations, and then we actually go back and make it really vivid. A lot of times in therapy, the aspirations, the goals, we just make it, and I remember this is like years ago, a really brilliant young therapist who was like a music therapist. got these great aspirations, but she had just been so used to, like, you get the aspirations like you get your grocery list, right? Okay, apartment, check. Okay, bread, check. And you just go check, and that's it.
Yeah, medicine, wake up time.
Right, but she really actually got the aspirations, right? So apartment, girlfriend, job, but it was really like check. But it was so, you might as well said, bread, eggs, butter.
Yeah.
Right. But it was so like antiseptic. Like it was like there was no like life to it. You might as well said like eggs, bread, butter.
Yeah.
And I said, you got great things, but I don't have any feeling for what that person has. You want it to be ripe. You want it to feel, you should know, Dr. Beck used to say this all the time. I used to love this. He goes, you should know the color of the dog that the person's going to have in their apartment. And it's like that's the level of vividness. You should be able to walk into it. And so when we get those aspirations, you're really going to talk to the person about, that idea of dreaming about it, right? Is like, okay, take some time, like dream a little dream, right? About what's going on. And so, but like together with the individual, you're just going to take some time. And a lot of times we're so rushed to be like, okay, I need to do at this person again. And again, I think the individuals we serve, I'll also be honest, as a provider who's been in this field for a long time and done a lot of therapy, I actually believe that a lot of individuals we serve across diagnoses feel this. So many people feel, and I think particularly when you start doing CBT, you feel like you have to get to doing stuff fast. And that's actually not a part of CBT. I'll really tell you, it's really not. Beck never did that. I've been really fortunate in my career. I've had just a lot of my really good friends are like these people who are some of the luminaries of CBT. And like when you watch them work, they're efficient, they're not fast. And there's a difference, right? Over the years, they've just gotten really good at how you connect with people. I think that's a skill that you build as you get better. So yeah, they're not taking like 24 weeks to chat with people about their dog, but they're also, if they need to take 2 sessions to sort of figure out where you're going to go, they're fine with that, and I've had individuals where I'm like, yeah, in the first session, we're not starting the intervention. I've also had other individuals where during the intake, we start prolonged exposure for PTSD, right? So like, there's sort of like, there's, if I've seen one individual, I've seen one individual. So I think that idea that like, we need to rush and start. And I talk to my trainees all the time. I'm like, there's no rush. We want to be efficient, right? Because every day that we stall, so we feel better, that individual is stuck with this distress. At the same time, there's a great old woodworkers adage. It says, measure twice, cut once, right? Which is like, just know what you're doing. Like be thoughtful. We are technically doing medicine. And I know like people like this are, but we are really doing science here. So like, be thoughtful in what you're doing. So we're going to make it really vivid. We're going to talk to the person being like, oh, tell me about your apartment. What are you going to do? What would your apartment look like? And it's so funny because sometimes it's like the design of the apartment. Sometimes it becomes like, who's going to come over to your apartment and what would you cook in your apartment? And then sometimes it's like, what would your dog, and then you're talking about like the dog and where would you walk your dog? And, like that, like the apartment question, which I've done only about like 1 billion times probably now, like the number of places that spins off to is amazing. But then the person's really excited. The other thing is every time I talk to that person, it becomes this funny little touchstone, whether it's apartment, whether it's getting, being in their kid's life again, whether it's going back to school, whether it's, whatever that aspiration is. And it's that really big picture thing. Once we get that, I go, this is cool, man. Can I help? It's not being like, okay, well, I'm the doctor, so I'm going to get you there. But it's the cool, like, like, can I get on the team? Right. Can I get a jersey? Like, I want to be on the team. Right. And it's like, cool. And then they're like, yeah. And they're like, well, and I think for myself as a psychologist, I go, well, how do we get there? Let's start thinking about it. And we just start thinking about, okay, well, how do we start getting there? Now, I think that there's sort of this, I'm going to use the phrase like a dialectic that I've got in my mind, right? So they've got two things going on, right? There's just the, like, let's start thinking about what are the steps that we get there? And sometimes there's just a really simple, nice straight line, or, okay, well, let's backfill it. And, probably getting up every day would make it easier, right? If I get up every day, and then, I could meet people. If I meet people, then I probably would start dating somebody, or I might find somebody interesting, or they'd find somebody who I might find interesting. Then I might start dating that person. If I date that person, probably break up with that person, then find somebody else to date. And then if I date that person, then I might get married. If I get married, then I might have a kid, right? Like, easy. It's sort of the straight line. And then there's sort of like, there's other activities that could add into it, right? To sort of kind of do those pieces. So for example, I might want to start like reading a little bit more, right? Because like, let's say I've been in a state hospital. I might have not been doing a whole lot that makes, I may have like fallen out of like sort of current events or like other pastimes. And so like, if I have to go out on a date and they're like, what do you like to do? Maybe I'm going to start like, looking up, video games or whatever like I like to do to get back into the flow of that. Now, I could read about, video games. That's never going to get me a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner, but it's actually going to increase the likelihood, right? I may feel like I'm out of shape, right? I could work out from now until the day I die. It's never going to get me a girlfriend or boyfriend, but it's going to sort of increase the likelihood. It's going to make me feel a bit more confident, right? So all of this activity leads to activity scheduling. So I always tell people, I've got good news and I've got bad news about CTR. The good news is this. If you were chiming into this thing being like, man, I've been chiming into Lorain's thing and I cannot learn one more intervention because my head is going to pop off my shoulders. I've got good news. It's activity scheduling. Nice, simple, old school. If you're sitting here going, man, I want to chime into Lorain. I want to learn something brand new that I've never heard about before. I've got bad news. It's activity scheduling. Nice, simple. But I think there's something elegant about the simplicity. I heard someone once say, anything that's new doesn't work. Anything that works isn't new, right? And it's really this, we have things that work. And activity scheduling, which is that systematic evaluating, increasing and monitoring of our activity, it's really, really effective. And it really spans throughout living well with psychosis, right? So if an individual shows up with a book, they're going to be like, let's do this, right? So there's that piece of it. And so there's this sort of like nice line that goes along. So that's one part of the side of the dialectic.
And with the activity scheduling, you've really got folks evaluating. How did you feel? What was your experience doing these activities? Did you notice an increase in your mood from where you started? Because maybe you didn't want to do the thing when you set out, and then you're really putting on your own scientific evaluation cap to say, okay, wow, I experienced this increase, which I only really realized by scheduling my activities and tracking the outcomes.
And the bummer is that so many of these people, so many of these individuals, and it could be mood, it could be energy, which is sort of different than mood, right? So if we're talking about negative symptoms, that it could be mood, it could be energy, it could be any of these things. It could be voices, it could be any of those worries, right? All of these things falter around activity. Like they really revolve around activity. If you kind of look across. And the good news is I've kind of looked at them. You guys don't have to go into it. But if you look across, like so many of the interventions, they're really highly effective, meaning that like we've studied them scientifically and we've seen that they really work. The highly effective interventions that we have for psychosis, so many of them revolve around, they start with this idea of increasing activity, right? Increasing what you're doing. And there's a version of like activity scheduling. And so, but it's sort of gathering those data because an individual is oftentimes doing, it's for one reason or another, they're probably doing something during their day, right? Whether they're going to the doctor, whether their team's coming over and taking them out to do something, they're doing something. And they're probably not gathering those data, right? They're not like holding on to the information. Right. And so they're probably also doing a lot more than they think that they're doing. Right. And so when I say, what day did you have more voices? What day did you have less voices? And they just go, this sort of like, if anybody remembers, like the overgeneralization bias, but they go, they're always the same. But when they actually track them, they go, actually, when I was talking to my mom, because she needed me to pick her up to take her to her, to get checked because, she just had a surgery. And then we went and got coffee, but then she needed me to help her pick up groceries. And then I had to schlep because she had dry cleaning and I wanted to go home and just go back to bed. But then I had more energy. But then I realized I hadn't heard my voices all day. So then then she said Dad wanted to see me. So I went over there, but then we watched a movie and that was really fun. And then all of a sudden it was like a whole day of didn't hear my voices all day. And then I went home and I felt really good and went out with my friends. But that experience floats away like a balloon. You say it really well. They don't hold on to those data.
When you mentioned it looked like my wheels were turning, what I was noticing is that you may suggest sort of a parallel process with one's family that you're kind of trying to fulfill in the therapy office. So in the same way that you are focusing on this hope, this dream, these positives, these interesting things about the person, it feels like you're encouraging them to develop that sort of reset with their families too. So they're not the identified patient necessarily, where people aren't only checking in about symptoms and so on.
Yeah, and it's a lot of the work that I do with families. It's also about validating families. I think one of the things that's really hard for families, providers and trainees at times is we have this you need to get your own therapy. This is their therapy. This isn't your therapy. You need to get your own therapist. And I'm like, okay, I don't find it whether you're a drug and alcohol treater, whether you're a depression, PTSD, I don't actually care. So this idea that these parents, I ask this question all the time. I said, do you ever feel like you're trying to become an airplane mechanic while the plane's falling out of the sky? And the parents always look at me. They're like, oh my God, you get it. And everybody looks like they're an expert. And they're all telling you different things. It's great that you're the ACT team now, but listen, when he gets discharged, I'm going to be, and I've had parents be like, I'm going to be the one sitting there in the middle of the night when I have to be there at in the ER and they're yelling at my kid and they're terrified. It's so traumatic. And they just feel so helpless and they're trying their best. And maybe they're not making great choices, right? There's sort of there's the whole section in the book about what your parents or family's doing. And I name checked as you read, I name checked my mom. That's my mom. That's actually my mom. I name checked my mom so hard that I actually had to get a release of information for my mom and she got a free copy of the book. Ruth. Yeah. Love you, Mom. And so, but it was really sweet, but the, thank you for remembering my mom's name. And so, but it was so, parents are just trying their best and they don't have the training that we have. And so helping them understand and really validating their efforts and helping them have another way, right? The Aunt Mildred principle was originally developed for providers, right? And Aunt Mildred was actually my Aunt Mildred and her son. She's no longer alive. Her son actually had to sign a release of information for that one, which is so weird. Writing books is so weird. It's so weird. But, it really is this idea of understanding what families are doing and then really helping them to return back to being mom and dad, not because you want to get them out of the way, but because it's actually their most effective role. And even when I've worked with physicians who are parents, a lot of times I go, one of the reasons you became a radiologist or you became a primary care physician is you really didn't like your psychiatry rotation, right? I kind of make that joke, and some of them actually, it's the first time you see them crack up in session. They're like, they just belly laugh, and then they calm down because they feel like I'm a doctor. I need to know this stuff. And so that parallel process thing, I think, is a really helpful one in helping them, aiming them in the right direction, validate what they're doing, even when those things are trying to control, trying to block what you're doing, they're doing it because there's a reason they're trying to do it. and when we understand why they're doing what they're doing. So the other side, the dialectic of how we get things in is as we do the activity scheduling, I'm also in my brain keeping in mind, like, listen, if I have a fear that the FBI is trying to kill me, I'm usually in my brain, like, holding on to, like, okay, where's that going to pop in? Like, I don't have to, like, wait for the FBI, threat belief to jump in and grab us and, like, derail derail the treatment. Like, I can usually sort of, like, get my little, like, psychotherapy binoculars on. Like, I don't have to hunt it down, but, like, I can kind of put my psychotherapy binoculars on and be like, okay, when's that going to pop up, right? Probably the first date. And I can kind of keep it on the, out there and ask questions to see, like, is this going to be a problem? When I send you out this week to go try and make some friends, is that going to be a problem? And sometimes I've had people with really severe threat beliefs, right? And the activity schedule and that activation and all that stuff actually obliterates all of it. And we just learn the lessons on the back end, right? Which is that my way of saying sort of that cognitive restructuring, which is that sort of old formal, that nice formal way. Mm-hmm. For other people, we get in there and we're going to, get our sort of screwdriver and our hammer and we're going to kind of like do some good, belief remodeling. And a lot of times I'm dropping in, Daniel Freeman's Feeling Safe program. I might drop in sort of, prolonged exposure for, PTSD and just do some like really, like 12, 15 sessions of prolonged exposure with somebody. If the memories are haunting them, in that work, I might do some voice work, around their auditory hallucinations. So that's sort of how the symptoms get, tackled. Because if I say, okay, great, you want to get the job, let's apply to it. Well, I would, but I keep hearing them tell me that I'm a terrible person and that, everybody hates me and that I'm a monster. So I can't really leave the house. Well, all of a sudden our activity scheduling, it comes to a screeching halt. And so we got to do something about the voice and say, well, they seem like they're kind of jerks. Like, help me understand that. And then we kind of walk through it. And then all of a sudden we start by using that activity scheduling as that, as testing out the beliefs about the voices. And then we might do some experiments in session. But then we might do some just really solid voice work and reevaluate the relationship with the voices, or there's a whole bunch of different ways that we go about it. And so that's how, but the good news is we have really solid formulations for all of the different symptoms of schizophrenia, but they're all nice evidence-based, right? Based out of the science we have. So,
yeah. Would you say that paranoia and auditory hallucinations are more common than people expect?
In individuals with psychosis, or just sort of in the broader population? Broader population. Yeah. I know that paranoia and auditory hallucinations, I mean, that there's one of the problems is a problem of definition. So one of the problems that we run into is that we're kind of like not really good at defining it yet. So depending on the definition of it, there's actually about paranoia, there's a great book called Paranoia, by Daniel Freeman, where he talks about sort of the journey into mistrust. If you're an if you're a person who likes listening to books on, not books on tape, but, audible books, I'm that old. Yeah. But it's read by a Scottish man. So if you really like listening to people's Scottish accents, it's even better. I was really upset that Daniel didn't read it himself. He's got a great British accent. But Daniel's one of our, there's these great people doing research, and he does this amazingly meticulous research. But it's a beautiful book because it's somewhere between almost like a memoir of his research and his sort of life and journey through this research he's done. And then it's also a review of the research. And it really talks about sort of suspiciousness and mistrust and paranoia in our society, but also sort of a review of it. It's a really great book. I've listened to it 2 times. I've read it 1 time. I'll probably listen to it again sometime soon. But yeah, what we know is that it's much more common. And I think we've traditionally thought about like, oh, paranoia, voices, things like that. They're just sort of like, we just rip them off of our diagnostics and we just throw it over there. They don't have anything to do with it. But what we found through the research is that they're actually just very much a part of the normal human experience. In fact, over in the UK, paranoia is just a description of an emotion, right? You could be angry, you could be sad, you could be all kinds of things. You could be paranoid, right? And so that's just an emotional experience that you could have. And so it's just a normal experience that anybody could have. So
I work a lot in perinatal mental health, and one of the questions that comes up a lot with clients and providers is how much of that paranoia could be postpartum psychosis versus the experience of being tasked with caring for a very small individual and just the worries and the threats that you notice through your eyes as a parent that you haven't noticed through your adult eyes when you're the only person you were responsible for.
Yeah. I'm going to a meeting soon where somebody's going to be talking about perinatal psychosis and there. So just in a very quick thing. So I'm looking forward to seeing what she has to talk about. Yeah. I've got a good friend who's very interested in that topic as well. So
yeah, people are exposed to that one without even knowing it just because of what they see in the media that's mislabeled or misdiagnosed, and how they're perceiving some of those big media stories. Is there anything else that you feel like from your position you'd want clinicians to know if they are curious about embarking more on this work, or if they are finding that there's a gap of information that they'd want to know more about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really exciting about this work, and I think this has to do a lot with sort of my journey, that or it sort of reflects sort of the journey that I've been lucky enough to go on, is a lot of people when they start doing this work, firstly, I find it really rewarding. Right. And so getting to serve these individuals and seeing them get back to their lives, and that they do get back to their lives. People have these great lives. There's these wonderful advocates online that you can go and look at, people like Cody Green and Kit Wallace, and Stephen Lathrop, and I'm forgetting lots of people. Rachel Starr Withers and just all of these people out there. Michelle Hammer in New York City, right? All of these people, they're just these amazing advocates out there who live with schizophrenia and schizoaffective disorder, and Gabe Howard with bipolar disorder. And, they're out there sort of talking about it. And so people do recover, right? What we know is that like a large group of people recover, and many of them just sort of like disappear back into life. A lot of the individuals I serve, they just kind of like, they go back and live their life, right? Just like if you got like an ingrown toenail, and it got better, you would just sort of, you wouldn't be like walking around the world being like, well, I used to have an ingrown toenail. You'd be like, you just kind of go back and live your life. Maybe you'd still be on medicine, right? Like if you had diabetes and like, or you used to get chronic migraines, you kind of go back and live your life, and maybe you'd still be on medicine to manage your migraines, but you wouldn't be like walking around the world being like, I'm still a migrainic, right? You'd just be like, be living your life, right? And that's it. So I think that's an important thing, because I think when we think about like, why would I want to work in schizophrenia, in psychosis, these people don't get better. They do. And these people recover and they go on, they live their life. That's one. Two, I think understanding that oftentimes we very much have the skills already, a lot of the skills. I think we need to adjust the skills that we have, but a lot of the skills we have, things like worry postponement, self-confidence work, things like activity scheduling, things like exposure, right? All of these things that we already know how to do, really map onto the work of psychosis, right? And so, when you come to it, if you've done work, we always used to say in the clinical trial, the two best kind of therapists who came to the clinical trial were child therapists and exposure therapists, right? Child therapists, because they knew how to sort of take a complex concept and make it really
digestible.
Like understandable, right? Like digestible. Thank you. And then exposure therapists, because they knew how to make it something that you could put your hands on, right? Like you just learn through doing. And we know, people like Christine Podesky, who wrote Mind Over Mood, people like Leslie Sokol, who does a lot of work training CBT. A lot of the people out there are saying, like, we need to get out of the seat and stop talking at people to do CBT. We need to start doing with people, right? All of Daniel Freeman's Feeling Safe program, it's all about doing. CTR is about going out and doing. Living Well with Psychosis, if you read the book, it's all about, like, great, you read that? Go do it, right? Go do stuff, right? It's all about do stuff. And so I would say, if you're sitting here and like, oh, I really like the idea, I'd love to help people, but I don't have any of the skills to do it. You probably have a lot of the skills, right? Like, if you ever learned DBT, a lot of those skills are going to be able to translate pretty well. If you've done exposure therapy, you've done CBT, it'll translate well, right? Always lean toward doing, lean away from talking, right? So talk half as much as you do, and you'll do really well. And the final part is just remember that this is an issue of social justice, right? We're talking about a group that people are very happy to blame, and very happy to forget at the same time, right? So it is the grossest dialectic I've ever heard of, right? Everybody is happy to forget these people and not give them any money or fund their treatment or help them at all. But they're very happy to remember them whenever something bad happens. And we know that these individuals are not dangerous. They are more likely to be injured by somebody else, be the victim of a crime than ever harm somebody else. And in fact, if you remove substances, their risk of their risk of danger to other people is removed, right? So if you kind of control for substance use or substance misuse, their risk of danger is removed for people with, like, a persecutory delusion, right? And so we're really talking about an issue of a group of people who need individuals who are willing to stand up and help. And it's really cool. It's really creative, awesome work. It's the greatest gift that I never thought I wanted and I never thought I'd have. And so it's just, it's really awesome. And hey, I got to talk to Lorain today, and, I get to do all this really cool stuff. So if I could ever be of help, let me know. I definitely will be out there and doing more stuff. So.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Final questions I like to ask everybody. What do you do for self-care, or what is a big self-care thing that you encourage your clients to do?
Okay, so for self-care for myself, a lot of cooking and gardening, and usually those go together because I don't like gardening stuff that's not going to feed me. I'm like, why spend all this time taking care of something that's not going to take care of me? And so I love cooking and gardening, but I'm also a big hiker and getting out. So anybody who follows me on Instagram just saw I was just out in, like, we were just up in Maine and got to go do, like, these awesome things. So I love hiking and getting out into nature. I think there's a great quote, "Into the mountains I must go to lose my mind and find my soul," kind of thing. So I love getting out into nature. And self-care for the individuals I serve. That's a really good question. Because I think I find what is good for each person, and so, but I think it's also, oftentimes it's just get up and do stuff, right? It's like, let's find something that you love doing and then do it regularly,
Yeah.
So, I think I'm a big get up and go routine guy. Like, so it's like start early, sort of like start early, start often. So I think that's usually but I don't know if that's self-care as much as just a good policy for a lot of the people that I'm serving.
Yeah. And any media you're consuming right now, books, movies, food.
Oh, this is probably not a lot of self-care, but we're doing the fourth season of The Bear. And then we do a lot, but we also do, like, a lot of Marvel, and I like a lot of usually when I'm watching stuff, it's a lot of fantasy, like Marvel stuff that gets me out of it. So
yeah,
when people are like, "Did you watch Sessions?" or "Did you watch this thing about?" It's like I was like, why? So I could yell at the screen and say how bad it is. I was like, if I needed a reason to drive my family nuts, I could just be myself. So I don't need to annoy my family.
That's great torture for all of our loved ones, isn't it? She shouldn't have done that. That wasn't ethical.
That's not real. My family actually is really good at being like, we know. We know. Right? So.
Yeah, my friends are really good at parroting. I think you've told us that that's really not ethical. That's a violation of HIPAA, what just happened there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this has been so fun, just like your book. I think that was such a great read. I appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. I'll link all of the experts and the books that you mentioned in the show notes. And I thank you, Aaron, for being here today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Self Careapist Podcast. If you did, please subscribe and feel free to leave a review. You can also follow along at the Self Careapist on Instagram or head to lorainmoorehead.com/podcast to grab a free copy of your own learning map worksheet to help track all of the tools and strategies you're interested in learning more about. See you next Wednesday.